Welcome to the BeDadly podcast, where we discuss all things Dadly, from being an entrepreneur while caring for toddlers to raising screenagers and talking the birds and the bees. We're here to help you traverse the vast and dynamic landscape of fatherhood. Enjoy practical advice, lots of puns, and even a few heart-touching moments.
And the dad jokes are pretty good too.
And now your host, Brandon Jones.
Hey dads, this is John Profit, content creator and coach at Bedadly.com. I just wanted to give you a heads up. In the description of the podcast that you're listening to, or if you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to include a link to the event that's coming up in mid-May that is produced by John Bush and a team of amazing people called Exit and Build. And we'd love for you to attend. We will be participating in this event as well. And we'll include a special portal for you to go through by way of a link in the description, as well as a link at the end of the video if you're watching this on YouTube or some other video platform. I highly encourage you to check it out. You can register for free and watch it virtually, or you can actually sign up and get tickets, show up in person and meet some of these great speakers and network. I was actually a speaker at this event last year, and I would say, aside from the value and wealth of information that you get from watching this content, the relationships and the connections that you build by attending this event, I think are even more significant. So I would highly encourage you to sign up for free, but I would encourage you even further to actually sign up, get tickets, and attend the event, especially if you're in the local Central Texas area. Thanks, and enjoy the podcast.
And just like that, we are back. Welcome to the show. I am Brandon Jones, your host for the BeDadly podcast. And today I have John Bush on the line with us. And John, you are up to a lot of things and a father, and we're excited to hear your story, your projects, and really what's keeping all the juice in the tank for you. So thanks for being on the show.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be joining you.
Tell us a little bit about your story real quick, John. Like, you have a pretty interesting story, and I would like for you to also like connect the thread into like Brave New Books and kind of how you even got into this path.
Okay. Well, I'm a father of two. My kids are 8 and 10. Well, actually, my son just turned 9. He's 9 and my daughter's 10. And here in Central Texas, was born and raised in Austin. And I'm an entrepreneur. I run 2 businesses, and we just started 2 more. They're very much in the startup phase. And a lot of my life centers around the pursuit of freedom. Freedom for myself, freedom for my community. That includes financial freedom, political freedom. Basically, I just believe people should be able to live their lives according to their own ends and their own values. And oftentimes governments interfere with that. So that's had a lot to do with my entrepreneurial path and my path as an activist. And my reverence for liberty and freedom also influences my parenting a great deal as well.
So let me ask you a question. What was the precipice? Like what really started this for you that you're like acknowledging and noticing, hey, our freedoms are being trampled upon, and I really care a lot about this? When did that start, and how?
I guess I was always kind of a rebel, like in high school and class clown kind of deal. But in 2002, I caught a documentary by Alex Jones. I'm not a big fan of his nowadays, but he definitely is on point when it comes to a handful of things. And it was all about 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. So September 11th, the terror attack, and the evidence that I explored led me to believe that was actually carried out by likely criminal elements within the U.S. government, maybe British intelligence, Israeli intelligence. And so that was a big eye opener for me. Like, wow, the government is capable of such treachery. What else are they lying about? And that led down a rabbit hole to explore what's known as the conspiratorial view of history. This idea that major world events are in large part created or inspired or manipulated by small groups of people working in secret in order to expand their power. And so that was like, wow, this is nuts. And that led to political activism and then post-political activism, like creating alternative institutions. And there was a lot of impoverished activism where I was just giving myself away. And that was doable until I had kids. And I don't know if your listeners have any experience, but raising children while broke is not a fun experience. So that's when I shifted into the entrepreneurial journey. And And thankfully, a lot of the hard work has paid off finally.
That's great. So you basically combined your passion for this freedom and passion for exploring these alternate routes, and then also your career. And you said, hey, like, let's just jump in with both feet. We've now got so many reasons to do this. If I didn't have enough on my own, now I have kids, and there's enough reasons to make sure that this happens. Tell me a little bit about these projects now that have come to fruition out of this perspective.
Okay, well, I did entrepreneurship since 2009. I've been self-employed in one way or another, whether it was working on someone else's project as a contractor, or I started a couple nonprofits, ran a couple businesses. Some of them no longer with us, but it was just persistence and keeping things going. And I ran an underground bookstore for a couple years, a retail brick and mortar here in Austin, Texas, called Brave New Books. We didn't sell a whole lot of books. We mainly sold natural health products. This was like the age of Amazon, so it was a challenge. But that was definitely a challenge, and learned a lot of lessons. And the bookstore is no longer with us. I take responsibility for making some poor decisions, but also just the circumstances we found ourselves in. But I think as an entrepreneur, one of the big lessons, of course, is persistence, right? Like you don't actually fail until you give up. And so if you adopt a mindset towards growth, these challenges, setbacks, failures, shortcomings can really be a lot of valuable insight and lessons. And so one of the businesses that kind of sprung from Brave New Books is Brave Botanicals. It's still around to this day. I guess we started in 2016. We sell natural health products, mainly kratom, which is a member of the coffee family. It helps folks with stress, anxiety, pain relief. It's made from the powderized leaf of a kratom evergreen tree. And interestingly enough, it's kind of like a freedom business because the government doesn't like it, because a lot of people use kratom instead of prescription pain medicine. Or my fiance, for example, used kratom to quit a Adderall habit. She was taking Adderall for ADHD, and she was drinking a whole lot too. She quit drinking as well using kratom. And we also sell Delta 8 THC and CBD from the cannabis plant. So that's one of the businesses that's doing well to this day. And then more recently, last year, I started another company called Live Free Academy, and we teach people about entrepreneurship, financial independence, cryptocurrency. And that's actually the company that's in part hosting this big summit that we're doing in May 13th to the 15th, called the Exit and Build Land Summit. It's just all about educating and training people and empowering people so they can experience greater freedom in their lives, whatever form that may take.
Man, I tell you, it's interesting. I mean, to be an entrepreneur and even having a small startup, and I've been now involved in a number of businesses, and it's amazing to see that you have all of these kind of, I'm going to say plate spinning, but you really do have a lot of things you're having to keep in motion. How do you do that? I mean, how do you manage your schedule, and what like, for example, just on a practical scale, or a practical level, what time do you go to sleep? When do you get up? What does that even look like?
All right. Well, for some context, the mother of my kiddos and I are divorced. And so we share parenting time 50-50. I was very adamant about that being the case for both my sake as a father and for the kids' sake, because they love both of their parents, which is great. So I do have a whole week without kiddos, which is completely different than the week that I do have the kiddos, as you might imagine, or as folks in similar circumstances understand. But, I've worked very hardly on discipline. And as my business enterprises and my responsibilities have grown, I guess it's a chicken and the egg kind of deal, because things just kind of take off, and then you have to level up in order to maintain or grow and not have it crash around you. But then also on the same token, the dedication to self-growth, self-improvement, improving your skills, sharpening your focus creates an environment where the businesses can grow. So to answer your question, honestly, like I work late often when I don't have the kids. And so we go to bed late, even though my fiance is like, she wants to go to bed earlier so we can wake up earlier. She struggles to wake up early, but I find myself like we usually start the workday around 9 or 10, But in the morning, I'm on my phone or following up with some stuff. And I do a lot of reading in the morning, especially. I like to have nice, slow mornings with my coffee, reading the book, checking up on some news, checking in on the orders. And then I'll try to get into the office around 9 or 10, having had breakfast. And then on the weeks that I don't have the kids, sometimes I'll work till 7 or 8, sometimes like 10. And so I find myself staying up late because I get home and I'm like, finally some time to relax or to watch a show that we like to watch, or just to relax with my lady. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a trap. I want to shift that whole thing, 4 hours earlier, so to speak. I don't have trouble waking up early per se. It's just, there's just so much going on during the day. So that's something that I could adjust. I find, success has a lot to do with being conscious of your shortcomings and then working to adjust and improve those areas. But one thing that's really helped keep all those spinning plates in motion, because they crash from time to time, is having a team. That's one of the biggest takeaways that I've had that's led to massive growth. The first biggest difference is mindset. It always begins with mindset and everything else follows from there. But building a team has really allowed me to scale my companies and to do so in a way that I haven't completely lost my mind. And it's always something I'm conscious of, like, is this something that someone else could be doing? What can we do in order to be able to remain as ambitious as we are without it all crashing and burning? It always comes back to bringing more people on to the team.
Yeah, it's funny. You said a couple of things that really stood out to me. A mentor of mine used to say that as personal development and in terms of even professional development, we've kind of got to set ourselves up to be insufficient at the task. Like kind of biting off more than we can chew, because it causes us to grow to new levels and causes us to really, take hold and say, hey, I'm either going to make it or it's going to break. But actually, even when it breaks, I've still become bigger than I was. And then the other thing that you reminded me of is I actually reversed my schedule. I used to be a late night person. I essentially had a coaching business. I had a startup in Austin called Good Society. Actually, you may know one of my business partners, Seth Blaustein.
Yeah.
Seth used to run Future Frontiers and Voice and Exit. So I'm pretty familiar with even the concepts, I think, behind, like the exit and build kind of mentality of really reaching sovereignty, self-sufficiency, and even having a net gain out of your own properties and your own, endeavors when it comes to actually moving even a community or a family or anything out into a space where you really are self-sufficient. My father also even has now started a homestead that he calls the Jonestead, a play on our last name. And it's just interesting. So I was running this business and I was a coach, and I was like, man, I just, don't seem to find me time. And like when I do get me time, it's late at night. And then I wake up and I kind of feel like I got to get the day started because I got kids and there's this schedule and everything moving along. And so I found myself spending time at night with myself. And instead, what I did is I flipped my schedule. And this sounds crazy. This is pretty extreme, but I started going to bed at 8:30 and I started having a shutdown complete earlier in the evening. And then I would literally have a digital sunset. Now I stole that I borrowed it, I should say, from Brian Johnson, who I really am a big fan of, from Philosopher's Notes.
Okay.
And he talked about having this shutdown complete in this digital sunset, and that when the sun goes down, your electronics and all interfaces go down because they have blue light. And so the sun goes down, the interfaces go down. And then I was able to actually start to get to sleep. I'd go to sleep at 8:30 and then I'd wake up around 4:30. And this permitted me the time to actually have spiritual time, reading, exercise, a little bit of meditation. I would get in some deep work, some writing and some reflecting and some coaching stuff. And then by the time my family woke up and they were ready for breakfast and stuff, I'd actually was already ready to like have breakfast with them and sit down with them. And I didn't feel like I was in a rush. I felt like I had so much more time. And so I've become pretty addicted to going to bed early. And I've also created this distinction in my mind where instead of spending time at night, I'm investing time in the morning. And so I see this compound effect from that result. So I really do like the flip on the schedule, which has been a real game changer for me these days. So tell me a little bit about exit and build, for example. So, what all is happening there at this kind of event, and not like a promotion for the event, but like what is it that is occurring that makes it really magical and makes it, worth everybody's time to be in something like that?
Okay, sure. So this is the second time that we've done the event. It's called the Exit and Build Land Summit. And it was a huge success the first time around. We had 25,000 people register. There was like 19,000 views during the live stream, and we had an in-person event, which is always really special. There's so much virtual stuff now post-COVID, or is it post-COVID? I don't know. It depends on what news outlet you're looking at, I guess. But there was a lot of excitement about getting together in person, and there's always just such a magic and connection there. So we decided to do the event again because this whole idea of exit and build, there's a lot of ways to bring about change in the world, some of them more effective than others, especially if your goal is like genuine, real freedom, like a genuinely free society, similar to what Seth's doing or was doing with Voice and Exit or Future Frontiers. It's funny that this Voice and Exit, this book, right? And it was like you voice your opinion and you try to persuade or change things. And if you can't, then you exit. We kind of pick off. It's like, all right, we're done voicing. I did political activism for like 10 years. Right. And we're exiting, but now we got to build something because like, where are we going to go when we exit? We got to build something. So it's a strategy that's like, if you don't believe in the political institutions, if you object to government, a lot of people always fall into this trap where it's like, our guy needs to be in power, then everything will be okay. When in reality, like it's the system that's the problem. It forces people to do things against their will, and it's so easily corruptible. So we're encouraging people to exit those systems that they find objectionable and to build new ones, right? And alternatives, cryptocurrency, for example, as an alternative to the legacy banking system or even to the US dollar, which is used for all sorts of dastardly deeds. Or growing your own food, or engaging in alternative natural remedies for your health, or homeschooling and homeschool co-ops instead of the government education. So that's really what it's all about. And at the event, it's May 13th and the 15th. We're doing it at the Bastrop Convention Center. And we're aiming to have 500 people there in person, which is going to be really, really cool, really special when you get that many people that are all on the same page. So there'll be speakers, there'll be presenters. We got Joel Salatin. We have Jack Spirko of the Survival Podcast, this woman, Diana Leaf Christian. She's like one of the world's leading experts on intentional communities. There's going to be a lot of TED-style talks that are shorter and punchier, and then more in-depth workshop kind of stuff. We're going to have local and farm-to-table meals provided every day. And a cool thing, being on a podcast about fatherhood, we're actually encouraging people to bring their kiddos. Mm-hmm. And my kids go to this local nature program called Natureversity. So we invited that program to help support the families that are going to be there. So included in the ticket is childcare, basically, where the kids are going to be outside in the courtyard. They're going to be learning archery, soap making, all sorts of cool homesteading skills, and playing and having a good time while their folks are networking and learning from the presenters inside. We may end up having to cap that at like 60 kiddos or so, because some people are like, oh, yeah, I got 3 kids. I got 3 kids here. I'm like, whoa, this we can't have 120 kids running around outside the event, but there's still plenty of room for folks if they want to bring their kiddos. And I'm just excited to be providing that opportunity for it to be like a family-centered kind of deal.
Yeah. Have you found that being a father has increased your intensity on this kind of subject and this kind of matter in the world? Like, when you look at the world through your fatherly lens, has it intensified things, or what's been that experience for you?
Well, when it comes to entrepreneurship, it definitely is a giant why, right? It's always good to tune to your purpose and your why. And so there were a few years there, maybe several years, while I was with the kiddos and their mom, where we were pretty poor and it was rough. We had electricity turned off, couldn't pay rent on our apartment. We had to move into this converted school bus. And it was difficult and unpleasant. And so I never want that for my children again. In fact, I want quite the opposite: access to resources and opportunities, and going to the water park or staying at Kalahari Resort up in Round Rock whenever we want, kind of deal. But when it comes to activism, most definitely, I always think about the type of upbringing and the type of experience my children are going to have when they're adults, and even beyond my children, like my grandchildren and their children and just the future generations. I think we really need to shift the trajectory that things are going on. And I think in large part, a lot of people are really starting to think outside the box with new technologies, new types of businesses, new ways of doing things. Cryptocurrency is a perfect example of just a complete uprooting of the old centralized way to do things. So I think that I feel really optimistic about the future, and especially if we can raise our kids of this mindset, then they'll grow up and they'll question or completely object to a lot of this nonsense stuff that everyone has grown accustomed to.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like, because I feel the same way. Like in terms of when I look at the world and I look how really sick and profoundly sick it is in so many ways, from the consumerism, the addictions, the digital addiction, the sugar addiction, the external like gratification that everybody's seeking all the time, the external validation that everybody's seeking. It's just like, there's so many things that aren't really right. I'm curious, how do you help expose your children to these ideas? I mean, obviously it's in your work, it's in everything, but what do you do to help a young child, for example, who is seeing all of these people being addicted to, for example, the digital addiction, or going and being addicted to sugars, whatever it may be. But how do you expose your children to these bigger ideas and get them on board with that?
I think one of the best things parents can do is lead by example, right? In children's early years, they're mostly just modeling the behavior of folks around them. And in large part, their parents, but also grandparents and friends' parents, and then what they see on the screens. I was going to say television, but I guess we don't even do television. I think a lot of people don't really do TV in the traditional sense these days. But right. I think it's just important to lead by example and to explain the why behind things, not just like, no, you're not going to have this candy because I said so kind of deal, which is like right. Arbitrary authority. But it's like, no, that the candy's not a good idea right now because we're going to be going to bed soon. And sometimes when you have sugar, you have a really high energy and it's difficult to go to bed. And then we feel grumpy in the morning and so on and so forth. But it's also the case that it's good for kids to learn the consequences, the natural consequences of things based on experience, not to take that experience away from them. Like my daughter has a pretty serious sweet tooth. But my son managed to recognize, because he had a cavity, and he was like, "Oh crap, this is serious." And now he's like, "Dad, don't let me get any sugar whenever we go to the festival, okay?" And he's actually remains pretty disciplined about it. I'm impressed for a little 9-year-old guy. But yeah, I guess it's also, I guess the best thing to do would be to lead by example and to set the standard, set the bar high as far as health and wellness and being balanced.
Yeah, because it's funny is like we live I've had our neighbors over here for my son's birthday party, and he was like telling me, he's like, "Man, you make me feel like such an American, like trashy person." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Dude, your refrigerator is full of like sparkling waters. Mine's full of sodas." He's like, "I'm looking at your pantry and your refrigerator is like ridiculous. It's all organic and you've got all of these things organized." And he's like, and I feel guilty. And I'm like, "Man, don't feel guilty or whatever." And so we embody that. But I can tell you, come Halloween, for example, both of my kids are going to give me the runaround around, the candy and everything. And then also, like, I don't watch TV at all. I really don't have any use for it. I don't even have time for it, really. And I have so many other things I want to do, so many books I want to read, so many activities I want to participate in. I just don't even have time for TV. But my little guy, on the other hand, I mean, he's like, I got time. I'm bored. I want to watch TV all the time. You know what I mean? Like it becomes hard to explain to him like, hey, I know TV is fun and it's all good and well, but TV is a lot like candy in that if you eat too much of it, it's unhealthy for you. If you watch too much of it, it's unhealthy for you. And so we have to moderate these things. And yet there is a challenge to get them to see the bigger picture because they only have such a small, they're in a small perspective, right? Like time seems different to them than it does to us. We have a lot of urgency. They don't really have all the responsibilities we have or the feelings that we have around things. So it is interesting. I'm kind of wondering, like, is there a way for us to help our children see the effects so they can make those decisions? So, for example, your son saw a cavity and was like, ooh, I don't want that. You know what I mean? But it is kind of, and life is that way, right? Like natural consequences are probably the best teacher ultimately. Like if we can help them bump up against natural consequences more often, I will say like, my son, I've tried to ask him if he notices how he feels the next day after he fought with us and stayed up later than he wanted to and just, was kind of being pushy about trying to stay up. And then the next morning he's trying to wake up and I'm like, do you notice that today feels a little different? You're not just hopping out of bed and you're kind of being a little cranky right now. Have you taken notice of that? But yeah, I was just curious about how, someone like yourself who's working in this space all the time, how you're exposing your children to these things and really trying to, because it feels to me sometimes, like you're saying, the system is broken. Like it's not necessarily the leader, it's an entire system. It's like, how do we operate and teach our kids these things while also operating in the system that's telling them so many other things, unfortunately.
Yeah. One thing that I think helps a lot for parents as far as avoiding frustration, something I learned to not expect a child to act beyond their age, right? Or beyond their maturity. And so it's always a balance, right? And early on, we were very much into like radical unschooling. It was very laissez-faire and very hands-off. And I always remember my dad saying like, because we'd have my parents watch the kids and it was like culture shock, the way the kids behaved and how we expected my parents to discipline or not discipline when they were going or whatever.
Right.
And I remember my dad would always say like, all right, John, we're going to try it your way, but whenever they get older, I want you to look back and think if this ended up being the right way to parent, right? And then sure enough, they did get quite a bit older. And I came to realize like, whoa, my kids are freaking nuts sometimes, and like I always I want them to be ungovernable by the government standards and be totally free people. But it's also like, wow, we've raised some rebellious kids and they're rebelling against their parents. So it's a challenge. So as I got a little older, as the kids got older, I shifted more into like a leadership position, right? And more, I don't know if strict is the right word, but trying to create more order actually, because there was a lot of chaos before. And that was something. And then when we went through a divorce, that was absolutely nuts. And there's so much uncertainty and pain and what's the schedule going to be like and blah, blah, blah. And that the kids unfortunately were exposed to that and it was not healthy. So since then, especially, I've had a really strong desire for certainty and stability and order, right? And you can have freedom and fun within the confines of schedule or balance or routine, right? So I think having that leadership and that order, kids can really thrive in that environment. Some semblance of structure, not hardcore authoritarian or rigid structure, but a semblance of structure definitely helps to maintain balance in everybody, the kids and the parents.
Are you familiar with wise parenting? Have you heard of that, wise parenting?
I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with the nouns.
I got this from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, and she was talking about perseverance and essentially she laid out this quadrant thinking, which I really appreciate when people can put things into quadrants. And the axes were demanding and undemanding, supportive and unsupportive. And what you described when you were doing unschooling sounded like where you would fall in the quadrant of supportive and undemanding, where basically the expectations have been taken off the table, but we're very supportive. We're going to provide for you. We're going to do all these things for you. We just don't have a lot of expectations of what things would normally look like or not look like. And then on the other end, if you were demanding and supportive, which is what she calls wise parenting, actually, let's go the opposite end. The opposite end of demanding and supportive, undemanding and supportive is demanding and unsupportive. And so in this case, this is authoritarian. This is, I tell you what to do. I'm very demanding, but I kind of don't tell you how to do it. It's like I expect you to meet my expectations, but I didn't give you any training. This is like the parent that's like expecting, you were kind of saying, and I really appreciate this, like seeing children at the age that they're at, or really having the expectation for what their age development is appropriate, right? Mm-hmm. But in this case, with the authoritarian position, you would almost take this position that you expect them to almost like act like an adult, even though they have no experience like an adult. They don't have the lessons. So then the other quadrant is, if you're not supportive and you're also not demanding, that would be like that lower left corner, that it would be considered neglectful parenting. Mm-hmm. And you really don't give a shit. Like you're not really being supportive of the child. You're not really expecting things of the child. You're just literally just letting everything go. And so that's neglectful parenting. But wise parenting is where you're supportive, but you're also demanding. You have expectations, and you're also going to help them learn how to meet those expectations by giving them proper training, by explaining things and kind of front loading experiences where you say, hey, like these are the expectations of dinner, or these are the expectations of the grocery store, or this is what we expect of you when you go to school or when you play with others, giving them the training, and then also helping them to think through it. Like, hey, we're making some mistakes. What do you think would be the best way to correct this? And helping them problem solve instead of telling them, right? The authoritarian would tell them what they did wrong and to stop doing it. But the wise parenting would say, hey, we're not meeting these expectations, which we have as a demanding thing, but let's talk about how we can meet those. What are some of your ideas for us to make sure that we're meeting all of the expectations? And it sounds like you're kind of naturally moving. You're kind of migrating over from supportive and undemanding to supportive and demanding, where you're actually getting into that, what they called wise parenting. And I can tell you that when I read that and learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so helpful, because I found myself oscillating, where in one instance, I'm really permissive and really supportive and warm. Like I'm like my kid's best friend. And then when things got too chaotic, now all of a sudden I'm really demanding, and they're like, whoa, dad's like uptight right now. But I'm like, hey, the house is a mess. It's a wreck, and we can't live like this. Right. So I was kind of oscillating. And then the second thing is that, you talked about order. And one of the things I found with order is, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a very like rules kind of based, but it could be a hierarchy of needs and priorities and wants and things. So there's a great format called when then. Right. So a format of when then is, when would be our priorities are met, then we get to take advantage of privileges. And so there aren't really a whole lot of rules. The rule is simple, is that when your room is clean, then you can go hang out with your friends. Or when your homework is done, then you can have your screen time. Or when the house is clean, then we all get to watch our movie. So you kind of just set up a format so that kids even learn how to set priorities and then enjoy privileges. And it also makes the privileges actually become kind of like the gas for you to get through the not so fun stuff, which we all have to get through. Every one of us has to do things we don't necessarily want to do in order to get to things that we want to do. So it's just kind of a framework that I really enjoy. And it sounds like you're kind of progressing into that.
Yeah. And it's a constant struggle. I appreciate the oscillation, because when things are like one extreme or the other, there's a lack of consistency. It can be confusing and stuff. Yeah. But I mean, parenting's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. I think it's important. One of the best things parents can do is just be conscious of how you show up with the kids, and just the constant exploration and reading books. I think I saw the Wise Traditions thing as a Facebook ad, perhaps, because as you were describing it sounded familiar. But yeah, that's good stuff. Definitely a lot to consider.
Yeah. And so I'm curious too, like, okay, so for example, a one-on-one time or getting time where you are reading with them or you're getting that face-to-face interaction, how do you balance that with all of these projects and everything? Because sometimes, for example, and I'm just saying, like, I know that it's challenging even for myself. I can see when I start to pick up extra projects or we put more on the plate, my attention span for everybody else goes down because I'm so poured into these projects. How do you work that out? And you mentioned that you have them every other week, but is it still a challenge? And if so, how do you meet that?
I try to do like an ebb and flow where there'll be like when we have an event coming up, for example, there's a lot of work that goes into organizing it and executing it. So that'll be a heavy focus, a whole lot on work. And then I try whenever I do have time at home without work to really give as much attention as possible and try to be in the moment, which is a challenge, right? But then it's like, it's on a micro scale. So it's like, all right, there's a lot of work this week. And then we do have some time to hang out together. So let's really lean in, make some popcorn, watch a show together, focus on that, try to put the phone away. But then on a macro scale, it's like, okay, well, this month and this period is going to be a challenge because we have this event. We're going to really be diving in. But
Right.
then the summertime, we're really going to be able to lean back or pull back, or like working really hard, but now we're going to take a 3-day thing where we just totally go to the beach and we're just hanging out the whole time. So it's an effort to at least make sure that the cup is full and it's never consistently empty. So the kids are just
Right.
kind of like, what the hell, Dad? And so they kind of understand it goes back and forth. And I always, remind them like work hard, play hard kind of deal. So I'm going to focus on this. And they know that I'm driven too. And, it's a balancing act, because for a while I felt like I was so focused on what's best for the kids 110%. But then I realized like, okay, well now I'm neglecting what I want to do in this world.
Right.
And then it's also like the work that I'm doing in this world is fulfilling for me. And when I'm fulfilled and happy, then I can show up as a better parent. But then also the work that I'm doing is trying to lay the groundwork for my kids to experience freedom that I never had. And then on top of that, like for me to build some serious wealth so my kids can have more opportunity. And so like I have aspirations to own a private jet. That's one of my goals, is to have a private jet. And so I want the kids to be able to experience, like, we're going on to wherever the heck you want to go. We're going on a trip here or there, and we don't have to worry about commercial flights. And I mean, it's baby steps to get there, but yeah, it's just a balancing act. And I find that when I feel more fulfilled in my life, it's easier to be a better father and to be happier and to share that love.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. It's interesting. I used to actually fly. I used to fly on a private jet all over the world with one of the people I worked for. And I worked for a man for 10 years, and he mentored me actually in business and in leadership. And he had very strict boundaries, I would say, around his weekends. This guy did not work on the weekends. He was solid play. He would often jump in the jet around noon on Friday and return Sunday evening. And they would go to Mexico to their house in Acapulco, or they would go somewhere else, but basically just completely cut off and be out for the weekend. And then whenever they got back, it was full on right back into the captain's chair and doing his work. So he really did have great boundaries around his work life and his family life. And it didn't necessarily look like, hey, every single day I'm giving you this one-on-one time. Although I will say in the evenings, the other thing he had a pretty good boundary on, although sometimes he was, there were business dinners that were pretty common. But there were hey, I go home and we do dinner, and everybody does dinner together. And he would often even have friends or neighbors come over and they would do dinner together. And on the weekends, it was weekend time. And he was really he isolated those pretty well, where I know a lot of us entrepreneurs, it's pretty easy to allow our work to creep into our evenings or allow it to creep into our weekends. And I saw him run the largest real estate company in the world while actually holding that boundary. So I know it's possible. And actually, I think part of the reason that he even had all of that success is because he took the time to really play hard and keep that boundary. And by the way, I'm glad to know you and have you in my network, because I like having people in my network that think that big. I too, I'd actually also like to own a cruise ship, which is kind of crazy. I know it's kind of crazy, but I want to take all of my friends and a bunch of different people sailing across the world and discuss important issues and have the opportunity to get into an immersive experience and maybe even land our helicopter on there a few times and have fun.
Now we're talking.
So and you also said something earlier for those, for those entrepreneur dads, just now having been involved with a number of businesses as well. You said that the team mattered so much in terms of the leverage. And I've even found, before you even have a team, let's say you're just starting something, finding a partner. Like, I've talked to a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to start a business and I've been thinking about this and I've been thinking about that. And I've written this business plan. I've done all that. Like, what would your advice be? And I'm like, you need to find a partner. And it's not even necessarily a financial partner. You need to find someone that has the juice in it, because what you're doing is you keep thinking and you keep, analyzing and considering. And I'm like, you need to take action. And one of the first actions I would take is find someone else who feels the way that you feel, because what happens is that you'll create like a flywheel effect. And like, when you kind of run out of juice, they'll have juice. And then when you kind of run, and it kind of keeps going around. And without that person, it really is like, I'm really excited about this. And then it goes on the back burner, and I'm really excited about this. And it goes on, and then you're talking about it for years, and you find, yourself thinking about, man, I should have started this thing. And now all these people are doing it. And so the team, it's like, even if you can't afford a team, at least find people that are ready and involved and want to get involved in what you're doing. I feel like that's really important, is to get people involved. Let me ask you a little bit, like, what was your childhood like? Was your dad an entrepreneur? Did he model a lot of this stuff for you? And what was your childhood like?
Okay. One more thing on the taking the weekend time and the focus time.
Yeah.
I realized, like, one of my biggest triggers for losing my temper and like acting in a way towards my kids that wasn't in alignment with how I wanted to show up for them was when I was trying to work and parent at the same time. Then I sucked at work and I sucked at parenting. And so that was like a revelation, like, okay, this is not getting me anywhere. It's just causing me frustration and spilling over on the kids. And then back to the expectations. How could I expect my kids to sit quietly or that, not want my attention when it's my time to be with them, So it's
100%. No, that is great. I'm really glad that you went back on that, because that is so important. You're right. You can't have your feet in both things, because it will pull you apart. Yeah. It's very difficult, and it's very challenging for them too. It doesn't feel good to either one of you.
No, it's a bust. But my dad, he wasn't an entrepreneur, but he was like an executive and worked really hard for a tech company in Austin, and he traveled a whole lot. And so I definitely picked up on a solid work ethic. And honestly, like all throughout middle school and high school, I was kind of a slacker and just partied with my friends and stuff. And so I always had this this desire to impress him or please him. And I felt like I came up short for so long. But then through my activism and later my entrepreneurship, I know that the guy's proud of me. It's funny how, like, even as an adult, you like want your dad to be proud of you, like
totally
as a child. But, he definitely had a solid work ethic. He earned a good living. He went more of the corporate route. And interestingly enough, like, he had he earned a good living for me and my family. And it was cool to see, looking back, to see like the progression. Like, it was a smaller home in not the fanciest neighborhood in Austin that we grew up in. And then they got this first newer house once me and my brother were born, and then moved to a new part of that neighborhood and a much bigger house kind of up in the hill with big trees and stuff. And it was cool to see that progression. But I do, looking back now, recognize that my dad, even though he was well off, he still had a bit of scarcity talk and thinking, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember tension between my mom and dad over that, because my mom wanted to buy more groceries and we need to have leftovers when we have guests and blah, blah, blah. And I would notice that tension, and that's something that kind of stuck with me too. And I'm a big fan of Grant Cardone. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. It is
absolutely
cool. Yeah, he's the man.
Did you watch his billionaire documentary from Discovery
Oh
Channel?
yeah,
that was pretty wild.
Undercover Billionaire, really.
Yeah,
cool.
That's a great show. By the way, if anybody's an entrepreneur and wants to watch an inspiring show, him and Glenn Stearns, the episode with Glenn Stearns is absolutely amazing. True inspiration to watch these guys go out there and try to make $1 million business in a very
with nothing, no contacts, $100. But he always talks about how like the middle class is not where you want to go, because it's this. You have enough, to have the car payment and have a home, but it's only an emergency or two away from being knocked out. And now with all the inflation that people are experiencing,
that's what I was just thinking
it's
about.
like just constantly eating away at your ability to provide for yourself and your family. So that was something that stuck with me that Grant would talk about and that I would recognize in my own life. And that's one of the reasons why I'm driven. Like, I want to be able to take care of my community and take care of anyone around me, and never be in a position where I have to figure out, should we do this or that or whatever. So yeah, I definitely learned a solid work ethic from my dad. And I think I learned from my mom, people skills and communication and hosting and just connecting with someone on a human level and showing up for someone. So it was like a good logic, emotion kind of combo.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's man, it's funny to think, how you were kind of a rebellious teenager, but then later you kind of you took on the work ethic of your father. I kind of think sometimes that it's easy to think in the moment that our kids aren't going down the right path, or they're not going to get it, or, kind of getting hung up with thinking that they should do it right now, and yet they do, right? Eventually they will. Like an example for okay, my son, I was talking about this with another guest in a different podcast where we're talking about how my son was saying things, he wasn't saying things correctly. So like biscotti instead of spaghetti, different little things like that. And his older brother was correcting him. And then I found myself correcting his older brother where I said, hey, he's going to get it. And I asked him a question. I said, do you think that he'll go for the rest of his life saying it wrong? He's like, no. And I was like, then let it go. It's okay. Yeah. Like he's going to say it wrong maybe for the next year or maybe 2 years. But for now, just let the kids say it wrong. He's like, oh, it just bothers me. Well, then I'm reflecting on it later and I'm recognizing where I'm kind of being hard on my son, the older one. And I'm kind of upset. And then I started to think to myself, do I really think he's going to get this wrong? Like for the rest of his life? Like, is he really going to be this disorganized forever? Or is it just, he's in this age and I just need to let it go for a little bit while also letting him know, hey, this is important. I think one of the things that would benefit you is a little organization. I think that would just help you. It'd help your mind. It'd help your grades. It'd just help you in general to keep things a little more organized. But then having the realization, I was like, man, maybe I'm doing the same thing to him, especially because I was being pretty firm about it at the time, that I was doing, that my son was doing to my little one. And I'm like, I think one of the things that I realized at one point was, my dad was really hardcore about certain things. And it wasn't until I got older that I actually appreciated them, because I actually rubbed up against life and realized that those things that he was telling me were important were actually important, but I had to experience them for myself before I made that conclusion. And so, I want to encourage all of us. I'm like just feeling inspired right now to encourage all of us, like, hold your ground, make sure that your values are there, but also create a little grace for our children and for our youth, because eventually your young boy that you have that's 9, he's going to be a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, and you may go, man, he's such a slacker, and he might just really well be just like his dad, who's ultimately going to be a hustler, but he's going through a period of time where actually, if there was any time to slack off, your teenage years aren't that bad. Of the time you go through it.
It's good to put some trust that everything is going to turn out okay. Like my kiddos were homeschooled, and they're like, we started off with the unschooling thing, And then because we had this divorce, and then there was a difference actually between their mom and I, what path to take as far as their education goes. And so there was a lot of inconsistency and instability. And so like when it comes to academics, both my daughter and my son, my daughter more so, and I don't like this terminology, so I always point this out, like quote unquote behind, right? Or when compared to most kids in government school that are more rigid and that have more consistency, they're a little bit more behind, especially when it comes to reading and writing, but they're getting it, right? Especially my daughter. My son puts up this resistance, right? But it's just had a lot of internal work to trust that he's going to be okay. These skills are going to start building on one another. And the more that you put pressure, it creates this resistance, right?
Totally.
So it's always like, it's a struggle it's a fine line between the pressure and like too little pressure, or like, I don't want to completely let go, but I think we're just really trusting that, just like you were saying, he's going to figure out the way to say the right word. The kids are going to figure it out. But then it's also like, I don't know, I guess the reading and writing thing is just such a struggle or like a big deal. But I try to recognize that like my son can take a plant from seed to fruit, like a vegetable, right? And like, that's a pretty damn important skill, and he's got great 100%. Animal husbandry skills and all these nature
which
and outdoor
most kids
stuff.
don't.
Yeah. So it's just all about letting go and trusting and not giving yourself a hard time at the end of the day, because, one thing, just listening to how you talk about your experience as a father, and you have a whole podcast and stuff, like, I think the biggest thing that's the differentiator between the kids growing up to be successful and, being equipped with the skills and tools and knowledge that they need is like a parent that cares so much to the point where they're analyzing their behavior towards their kids. There's a lot of parents that are just carrying out a program. They're just recreating what they experienced from their childhood. They're not even conscious of it at all. But when a parent can be like, oh, I feel like maybe I was a little bit too rough there, or I'm going to read this book or this parenting philosophy, or I'm going to start a whole freaking podcast to talk to other dads about parenting. Like, I think that's really what makes the big difference, is caring enough to self-reflect on how you're interacting with your kiddos. Really makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, it's, for me, it was out of necessity. How you said, for example, that you started to notice that your kids were just kind of wild and you're like, there's a lot of chaos and it's like, we can't have this much chaos. So you made some adjustments. When I got custody of my son, he was 5 years old and he was expelled from kindergarten.
Wow.
I didn't even know it was possible. He was a wild animal. I mean, he literally had he wouldn't use the restroom in the toilet. Like, he would pee on your walls or in your trash can. And you'd be like, why did you do that? And he's like, because I wanted to. And you're like, whoa, what do you,
oh man,
just wild, and defiant. And it was really like, and then I was trying to do all the old school stuff, the spankings, the groundings, all of that stuff. And it wasn't working. I was getting nowhere. He was just like angry at me. I was angry at him. He wasn't behaving and none of that stuff was working. And so really it was out of pure necessity and me owning the fact that I'm like, yeah, I definitely don't have this figured out. My son hit a wall where he said, and this was a breaking point for me, but he said, Dad, I'm really sorry. Like, I don't mean to make you guys upset or make my teacher upset. I'm just a bad kid. Dude, it crushed me. And I was like, dude, you are not a bad kid. Like, you make mistakes a lot. You have some behavior challenges, but you're not inherently bad. Like, I just needed him to know, like, there's not something actually wrong with you. You just have to work on some things. And it was kind of a breaking point for me, because I was like, man, all the things I'm doing and what these teachers are doing and all the things that we think we're doing right, we're actually causing this child to feel this feeling that he's a bad kid. And I'm like, the system's pretty bad. I can see its problems and I'm not really clear on like how many implications are happening there, but there's something happening here that's not making a healthy child. And an example, when I say the system is not right, you said that you didn't really like how they talk about not being on par or not being on pace, right? And like, I put my son in a private school because he was having so many challenges. And what I started to learn was a lot about social emotional development. And my son had basically none. And he was completely disconnected. He felt disconnected from me. He didn't have a strong attachment. And it wasn't until I started doing therapy and work with him that I started to learn about this. Mm-hmm. But once I did, I realized so many of the problems he's having in school too is because he's lacking this belonging significance in school. He doesn't have a strong attachment. The teacher has like 20 something kids. Like there's no way to create the connection. So I put him in a school called Integrity Academy in downtown Austin. And it was expensive and it took a lot to put him in there. It was a lot of work to figure out how to get it done, but we did. And one of the reasons I put him in there is because they told me right away that they believed that the foundation for education as a child to have a strong social and emotional attachment and a social emotional development before they're even welcoming information into them. And if you tried to put it before the other, like you have children that basically don't have those attachments at home, that don't feel that safety and that belonging and that confidence, then what happens is those children start to feel behind. They start to feel oscillated and they start to actually act out. And you create these little rebels and these defective society, into societal standpoint, like they're kind of defecting from the overall thing where they say, hey, I don't like your system. It's not me, it's you, and in a way they're right, even though they don't exactly know how to put it into words. And so they're misbehaving. Yep. And so I put them in this school and they focused on, they had, for example, an opening circle and a closing circle every day. And I know that kind of sounds like woo woo, whatever, like, hippy dippy, but you know what it was? The welcoming one, they were asking if there was anything that the children wanted to talk about or share that others should be aware of today. It was so interesting. When I first heard that, I was like, well, that's an interesting concept. And then I saw it in action. Kids were like, last night, my cat died. Well, actually, that would affect the child's day, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now we would see why the child might feel a certain way or behave a certain way. And then the rest of their community could support them through that. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the day, they have a closing one. They'd say, before you go home, is there anything that you want to let everyone know before we leave here? And sometimes the kids would say, hey, I had a really hard time with Sally today, but I just want you to know that tomorrow I want to have a better day. Mm-hmm. Boom, closure, opening. I was like, man, what a great system. And actually it was, then all of a sudden my son's academics started going up. Yeah. And I was like, dude, 100%, we gotta learn how these things affect our children, how they play into their mindsets and everything. Mm-hmm. But anyways, the long story short is that mine was out of necessity. And then I started getting involved in it. And then I started getting really involved in it. And now today I'm doing this because I was the parent that was completely flailing everywhere, and failing, but just kind of flailing around, like spanking and grounding. And I'm angry, fire breathing dragon dad, and losing my temper and all of this stuff. And it was like, that's not working. And then kept trying to read different books and go to different workshops and stuff. And ultimately ended up finding out a lot of stuff. And now I'm parenting in a completely different way. And I'm like, man, I could help a bunch of dads because there's some stuff that I could share that if they knew these distinctions, if they knew this mindset, they could parent from a completely different position and get more cooperation without like the punishment and the reward and just playing this oscillating game and all of that. And so, yeah, it's what we're up to today. And it's awesome. I mean, it's really fun. And it's also really fun to get to be exposed to wonderful fathers like yourself that are doing amazing things in the world and get to see like these people that are building cool things and really making the world a better place through their leadership and just get to talk to them. So it's a joy, man.
Right on. Well, yeah, well, that's a great story. It's a struggle, but it's a great opportunity not only to raise better kiddos, but to become better people, not just better parents, but better people. It's such an opportunity for self-reflection because our kids, they're like literally us. They're genetic encoding, nature and nurture, and they're like a reflection looking back at us. And so when there's chaos, it's like our life might be chaos, or when there's disrespect, it's like, well, do we even respect ourselves, or do we show up in a manner that's worthy of the respect of other people, whether it's a kid or anyone else, right? And so when you can have that consciousness, it's really consciousness in all in everything, conscious of the food that you eat, conscious of the way we treat other people, conscious of the system that we find ourselves in, and if it's serving us or serving others, and conscious of the way that we raise these little human beings. So yeah, it's cool to talk to people that have that level of consciousness, because it makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think children are kind of like the best self-actualizing tool you could ever have.
Yeah.
It's like they really will break you down where you have to reflect on your shortcomings and what matters to you and what you want to bring to the world. It's funny you said these mirrors the other day. Funny short story. I go to my son's room and I said, "Hey, Sheldon," and he goes, "What?" And he said it in a tone. He actually didn't say it. When I just said that, it kind of sounded a little sharper than his voice. So it wasn't quite like that, but he was like, "What?" And because he answered "what" and not "yeah, Dad" or whatever, I kind of was like, whoa, like, what's that about? I didn't know what he was doing or anything. But then he comes to the door. I said, "Well, can I talk to you?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he comes to the door and I said, "Hey, bud, before I talk to you, like, do you mind saying like, yeah, or what's up, Dad, or something like that? Because when you say what like that, it just sounds like I'm bothering you, and it made me defensive. And I'm just wondering if you don't mind like answering a little differently." He goes, "Oh, yeah, sorry, Dad. I didn't mean anything by it." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I was just, just need something about it. Just kind of got to me." And he's like, "Yeah, no problem." So then later we're in the car and I realized that I was kind of like making the emotions that I had his responsibility, and so I told him, I said, "Hey, that thing I was talking about at the door about, saying what?" I was like, "I just want to own that, like, you didn't necessarily make me feel anything, but I just wanted you to know that sometimes the way you respond, if you respond differently, it'll affect people differently." And he was like, "Oh yeah, no problem, Dad." He was like, "I just kind of got tickled too by when Cohen said 'Dad' right after you walked away, and you yelled down the hallway, 'What?'"
Yeah.
And I literally didn't even realize. It was such a blind spot. I just buzzed out laughing.
Nice.
I was like, "Oh my gosh." And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, I literally was like laughing in my bedroom. I was like,
Nice.
That is great.
I love it.
Because, you just never know. Well,
Yeah,
this has
little
been
nugget.
so much. Yeah, isn't that fun? Well, this has been so much fun, man. We're definitely going to put a link in the description for how they can get to Exit and Build. How else can they find out about like Brave Botanicals and some of the other things that you're up to? Where would they find you and get access to some of this great stuff?
Okay, cool. I'm active on Telegram because Facebook likes to censor stuff like this, but I have a Telegram channel. I can share the link with you as well. And then
Please.
If folks ever want to try any of the Kratom products or Delta 8 CBD, the website's mybravebotanicals.com, mybravebotanicals.com. And then I have all sorts of great online courses and webinars and stuff at livefree.academy. Livefree.academy.
That's great, man. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, John. And we look forward to having you back. And also, I'm looking forward to Exit and Build, man. I'll definitely come check that out.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you've received some value from it, please share it with other dads and consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll see you in the next episode. Looking for support with your fatherhood journey? Go to BeDadly.com and take our Dadly Disposition quiz and learn helpful insights on how you can overcome power struggles with your kids.